For the last week straight at least, anyone with a social media account on any platform has probably seen more than their fair share of Switch OLED versus Steam Deck memes, comparisons, complaints, and outright vitriol. Now, far be it for this humble channel to consider itself judge and jury, but I do feel it's important to broach the topic because the nature of the memes and the arguments they're creating is somewhat problematic. Before we get into why that is, however, I'd like to first of all state my personal opinion on the two products, so that you can be very clear if I'm inserting any bias into my points of discussion going forward. So firstly, the Switch OLED, which I think is a fine enough product, albeit disappointing for folks who were hoping for more substantial upgrades to the Switch. I think if you're primarily a portable Switch user, the product has some reasonable appeal, and if you're coming in new to the Switch, it's a small enough jump up in price from the base model that it'll be attractive to a lot of people. As for the Steam Deck, well, PC gaming is still my main daily platform and I love it. If I didn't own a Switch, it would probably be a strong consideration, but the need for a handheld that I'll mostly play indie games on is already covered for me. That said, the fact that it can run AAA games, albeit at a reduced resolution, is definitely appealing, and docking it to create a little PC would also be cool. In my house, we consume most of our entertainment through a PC hooked up to the TV in our lounge, so I could certainly see a future version of our home where this is an ideal product for us. I see value in both, I just don't need both since I'm already a Switch owner. But that's not to say I have a preference toward either. So the first thing I think we need to do here is a little kind of fact checking, I say the term loosely, for some of the claims that are being made in the memes and the arguments that are resulting from them. The biggest and perhaps most egregious are the assertions that Steam Deck owners will be able to use emulation to not only access all the retro games they like, but also the Switch library itself through the Yuzu emulator, making the Steam Deck the real Switch Pro we always wanted. The obvious counterpoint to this is that piracy is illegal, and in no reasonable world do we consider success to be legitimate if it's achieved by breaking the law. But we also have to consider if that's actually even possible. Whilst I have no doubt the Steam Deck will happily run emulation up to and including GameCube, PlayStation 2, Dreamcast, have you seen the recommended requirements for Yuzu? In both CPU and graphics, the Steam Deck isn't quite hitting the mark. It may have the same clock speed on the graphics card as a GTX 1650, but when we consider that it's sharing its graphics memory from the 16 gigs of system memory, which is also of a slower memory type, it's not so favourable. Whilst I don't believe for a second that Switch titles on Yuzu on the Steam Deck will be just unplayable, I suspect more action-packed or CPU-intensive games will feel at least somewhat like a slideshow. And there are other hardware discrepancies too, such as loading times if you're reading most of your games off of an SD card as opposed to the faster internal storage. It's a lot to take in and consider, but it seems like quite a daring leap to assume the Steam Deck is going to have such crushing performance when its hardware specs don't really back that up. Now, for what it is, it's very powerful, but the Switch is optimised to play Switch games, and a generic PC platform isn't. The next issue we should talk about are the Switch killer assertions and the general mood in these memes that Nintendo should be quaking in their boots somehow at the release of a Steam-based handheld. Using the latest data, mobile gaming has the largest market share in video games, at nearly half of the market. Console and PC are much closer in competition, however console has consistently held a higher share in recent years and at last look was beating out PC by about a 5% margin. Mobile gaming is absolutely the platform to beat right now though, and no amount of warring between PC and console is going to change that. However, when we look at developer distribution and which formats they favour making games for, It tells us a very different story, with PC absolutely dominating all other consoles and holding a sturdy lead over mobile too. Now this allows us to make a few interesting educated guesses. Firstly, that the variety of games being released will always be greater on PC, and we already know that Steam is the biggest platform for those PC games, but also that a handheld has a far better chance of clawing back some of that market share from mobile gamers than a static platform. And that also lets us make another educated guess, based this time on human behaviour. When we think about brands that are successful, identifying the market desirability of a product tends to be fairly low down in the things that they do right or well. A strong, reliable brand that has always been around tends to be favoured by your average person because it's something they know and trust. This especially becomes important if you are buying a product for the first time, where as humans we become far more likely to join a big established tribe than huddle up with a small and unknown group of people. Valve and its Steam platform may feel like a household name to those of us who game regularly on a PC or speak regularly with others who do, but to those 48% playing PUBG and Raid Shadow Legends on their phones, they probably feel like the small indie firm compared to Nintendo. The final point we should discuss is that the majority of this discourse is being used as an opportunity to dunk on the Switch OLED and by extension Nintendo. The Switch Pro was rumoured to be a brand new 4K all singing all dancing version of the Switch set to take the world by storm, but with a very tiny and quick bit of Google sleuthing it becomes clear that those rumours were never anything to do with Nintendo themselves. In fact, a closer look only shows Nintendo saying no to a Switch Pro, so where did this idea even come from? Well, the answer is us, the video gaming community. Despite being deeply aware that Nintendo haven't been a hardware performance focused company since the GameCube days, and despite seeing their continued growth and success during this time, the Wii U notwithstanding, we all cooked up this dream of a Switch that could do all the things a Switch was never even intended to do, and then got mad at Nintendo when they didn't deliver it. Up until this point, you could be forgiven for thinking that I am a Nintendo fanboy and I'm just defending my preferred brand because, well, most of my analysis of the situation has been in defence of Nintendo. But therein is exactly the issue. The criticism has been really quite one-sided, and so as a result Nintendo fans are feeling hated on and they're blasting back and being extremely unfair towards Steam Deck. The end result of this tribalised pissing contest is that neither party's actually correct in their assertions, and both parties just end up feeling awful and frustrated, and it's a net loss to all involved. And don't get me wrong, it's easy to see why the criticism is so one-sided. The Switch is a known entity, the community just doled itself out a heaping bowl of disappointment with the so-called Switch Pro, and meanwhile the Steam Deck is something new, fresh, and represents the possibility of mainstream change. But these frustrations are born entirely of one thing: our collective passion for video games, regardless of our preferred platform. None of us would be getting mad, trading insults and thinking up inflammatory memes if we didn't care about video games and want them to be amazing every minute of every day. So whichever your preferred platform, I hope that you can understand that the way you view things might not always be the way it's going to go. And instead of channeling that frustrated energy into something that makes other people feel bad, you have an option to just not do that. So give the memes a rest, folks. It's just too bloody hot for all this bother. This has been Retro Retrospectives. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and to share the video wherever you like to do the social medias. I'll be back soon with more retro, so thanks for watching everyone.